Kat Marks, thank you so much for joining us at SHOWstudio to talk about the back braces that you have been exhibiting as part of the show cabinet. First of all, the pieces that you are exhibiting are based around the Boston back brace. It's a medical device which you actually wore as an adolescent. Can you tell us a little bit about how this functions and what it's actually designed to treat?
Sure. Well, first, thank you very much for having me exhibit and for this interview. So the Boston back brace is, yes, a medical device, and it's used to treat a condition called scoliosis. And scoliosis is a curvature of the spine. And I was diagnosed with scoliosis, I think I was quite little, I must have been about 6 years old, and sort of monitored it for a while. And then when I reached sort of the peak growth years, which is when you're in puberty, my doctors decided that it would be best to put me in the brace. And so the Boston back brace is worn for about 22 hours a day. So I wore it to sleep, to school. The only time I really took it off was when I was showering or playing sports. And wore it for 2 years straight. And it's sort of like a rigid corset is how I would describe it. Sort of a really thick, hard plastic that wraps around the body from sort of just under my chest up into my armpit and sort of around my chest and down onto my hips. And it sort of velcroed at the back with 3 straps, and it was really tight, and on the inside was sort of these pressure points that straightened the back when it was worn. So it was actually about an inch taller when I was wearing the brace than when I wasn't wearing the brace, obviously due to the curve in my spine. And so that's what the brace is for.
It sounds kind of, almost like an endurance task, for 22 hours a day. And, I mean, what was it like to actually wear it at an age where, it's quite crucial to establish your own sense of self and, your own identity?
I mean, definitely at the beginning it was quite hard, just even physically getting used to wearing the brace. It's this, like, external sort of object that, doesn't belong there. But, it was really crucial, actually, in terms of, like, building character and who I was, and that experience of wearing the brace, I think, really helped to, develop a degree of humility. Because, I mean, anytime, for any person, puberty is, like, the worst age. I mean, everything is so awkward and uncomfortable, and, I was so embarrassed about having to wear the brace. Like, it made me different from everyone else, and all I wanted to do was fit in with my friends, and so in that sense, it was really, having a bit of adversity there was, good in terms of developing character. And later on in life, the brace, when I was designing the collection, the braces, all I wanted to do was stand out from my friends and from my colleagues in terms of who I was as a designer. And so the brace, helped in that sense. It sort of came, full circle in that sense.
It's really kind of interesting to hear you talk about it in a really positive light, and how it impacted you in a really kind of, in a good way. And obviously, aesthetically, the braces are bold, striking, monochrome, bright red, really strong shapes. The material's really rigid, and they look incredibly empowering. I mean, was that your intention?
The intention was to create something that was really strong and rigid, so similar to the braces. When I think about when I first designed the collections, it was really sort of serendipitous how it all came about. And it all started with Kurt Vonnegut, an author, science fiction sort of novelist from the 50s, and his novel, The Sirens of Titan, which a friend had just given to me. And I read it the summer before I started designing this collection. And he quoted, or he described this sort of future world where people wore heavy slabs of iron, like on their chest and on their back, and that really, it sort of like sparked something inside me. It sort of reminded me of the brace. I mean, I hadn't thought about my back brace for years, like since I stopped wearing it, I sort of like moved on quickly from it. And that quote from Kurt Vonnegut really like sparked it inside of me, and I decided that it would be really neat and really cool to sort of explore the brace in a fashion concept. So in terms of that is sort of how the strong or like, super human power sort of came into play there. It was about creating that fashionized version of the brace. And in a way, like, I think it was a little bit therapeutic for me. It was sort of like this sort of like coming to terms with, having worn the brace, and I think it was a really like positive thing for me in terms of design. And as for the colors, I mean, at the time, those bold colors, the black, the white, and the really cherry red, were so like essential. They were like the essence of who I was as a designer, and I think those three colors still sort of radiate throughout my collections. Although now, if I was to reinvestigate those braces one more time, I would be really interested to see what they would look like in different color palettes, and or how they would come across in a different way.
That's really interesting. And in terms of how you made the braces, they're vacuum-formed thermoplastic braces, I think, and they're incredibly refined. Can you tell us about the process for actually making them?
Sure. Well, in 2008 is when I was designing this collection. I actually didn't possess the material knowledge to actually form these myself. I was traditionally trained as a tailor, and so I had designed them exactly how I wanted them to be, and I had hired an industrial designer in Toronto to produce them for me, or to manufacture them for me. And his name is John Deal, and he produced the braces based on from a vacuum forming process, which is sort of where the plastic, so in this case it's ABS thermoplastic, is heated to a point where it's really malleable and soft, and is sort of placed on top of a mold, or in this case it was a mannequin, and sort of sucked down really hard. That's why they call it the vacuum forming process, which then forms and stretches the plastic over top of the mold. And then they were painted and finished with Velcro straps. And actually, the braces that you're seeing now in the exhibit are something I like to call the braces 2.0, because before I put them on the exhibit, I sort of it was time to sort of refurbish them and give them a little bit of a facelift after a number of years. And so, had kind of stripped them down, and the skeleton was still there, but had repainted it using like an auto body finish for paint, finishing the insides with flock, and sort of changing the straps from the Velcro, which is sort of mimicking the actual Boston back brace, and I changed it into like leather or PVC straps. It just seemed a little bit more refined for the final product.
And in terms of the concept for them, did you have a strong idea of how they would look when you started, or was it more experimental?
Back then, it was very much a linear process, so I knew exactly what I wanted them to look like at the beginning. So I sort of like drew them, made the technical sort of drawings, the size, the measurement, exactly what I wanted, and then had them produced. So in that sense, it wasn't so much experimental, which is more how I'm designing these days. Like my collections now are like quite intuitive, or what I would call maybe like instinctive design, where the design actually occurs throughout the entire process. So a lot of the times I don't know when it's finished until I've actually reached the end point of the product. So two very different ways of approaching design, but the braces themselves were, very much decided at the beginning exactly what I wanted them to look like.
And how are they to wear? Are they comfortable? And how does that kind of very strong plastic interact with the body?
Well, I've never actually worn one of the braces from the collection myself. They're not my size. However, I have asked, people that have worn them how they feel. And I think, the response has been that they're fairly comfortable. I imagine that it's very similar to wearing Boston back brace. It's very uncomfortable at first, sort of like this artificial being on your body. But what happened, after wearing it for so long is the brace became like a second skin. And it became like so natural to have it on my body. And even though it's been years since I've actually worn the brace, there's still sometimes I have this physical sensation where like something's missing, almost like that external part, that brace is not there, and it's really such a strange feeling. But I think overall quite comfortable to wear once you get into it.
Yeah. And also they very deliberately alter the silhouette of the body. They hold the waist in tight and accentuate the hips. And they kind of exaggerate the idea of the hourglass figure. Are you deliberately playing with traditional ideas of beauty?
I don't think so. That, so much didn't come into play in the design process. I think it was much more for me about creating something that was really interesting to look at. It was creating an aesthetic. And it was so much about creating a collection that, set me apart and made me sort of that avant-garde designer. So I think that was more what I was trying to challenge and trying to push, was creating that interesting aesthetic by combining, plastic and on the body. Although it does, accentuate the hips and the bust, and it is, cinching the waist. But I think it was much more about creating that aesthetic, that sort of vision that I had for who I was as a designer and how I wanted to be portrayed in the industry.
And it was your first collection, so how has that informed your later work?
It was my first collection, and I had no idea how much it would inform my later work, and the braces has really carried through for a number of years. I mean, I like to say plastic fantastic future when I think about the braces, because that is sort of what happened with them. Is I started becoming more interested in the idea of plastic on the body, and the braces is really what sort of started me on the route of what we call fashion artifact, and doing the MA at London College of Fashion, and sort of learning to work with plastic myself and learning how to do that material process, how to manipulate it, how to cut it and form it. And I think even today I'm still really fascinated with that idea of rigidity on the body, and that comes in so many different elemental ways, whether it be like leather or PVC, or in this case this rigid plastic. And so I think it has absolutely influenced the way that I look at my work and the way I look at material for many years.
And see, obviously it was really informed by personal experience. How important do you think that is to design and to art making in general? Do you think that's an important aspect of it, or not really at all?
I think it can be an important aspect, for sure. For me, in this case, it was very important, that personal experience. I think, design doesn't always have to be from personal experience, but it can absolutely inform the way that you approach, or how a designer approaches their work. I think it's important for me, like, to be able to feel it, to be able to feel what it is that I'm doing. That intuitive process is much more about feeling it rather than knowing it. So, and a lot of times that is influenced by personal experience, or the way that I react to certain things, images, and the way it makes me feel about how I want to put that out into the ethers of the universe.
And do you see your braces as kind of wearable items? What kind of women do you see wearing those pieces?
Oh, goodness. Well, most certainly it would have to be a bold woman, bold and confident, strong character, I think, and a little bit of sexuality thrown in there for sure. Someone that was confident in who they are, and I think the braces are quite strong in themselves, and so it would have to be represented in the type of man or woman that would wear anything of mine.
Well, that's absolutely great. Thank you so much. It's been so interesting speaking with you.
Well, thank you very much. It's been my pleasure to speak about the braces and to have them on exhibit with SHOWstudio.